This is the story of a devastating moral contradiction perfectly captured in a single carefully choreographed frame. We see Meghan, the Duchess of Sussex, standing in Switzerland, weeping as she empathizes with grieving parents who have lost their children to the dark corners of the internet. It looks like a quiet, deeply personal moment of human connection. But just out of frame is the machinery of a massive public relations campaign, meticulously designed to launder a rapidly depreciating personal brand. In less than a few years, what began as a fairy tale exit from the British monarchy has morphed into a staggering display of commercial desperation. What looked like a small public moment of charity was actually a devastating metaphor for a woman who has run out of collateral, resorting to the weaponization of victimhood as the ultimate survival tactic. In this video, we are going to unpack exactly what happened behind the closed doors of their California estate, why the Hollywood elite abruptly severed ties, and how a series of deeply cynical PR maneuvers destroyed the Sussex empire. More importantly, we will explore the subtle, chilling signals that prove their golden era is permanently over, and how their desperate scramble for relevance mirrors the darkest, most entitled corners of the very institution they claim to have escaped. To understand the sheer magnitude of this collapse, we must first remember the blinding light of their arrival. Think back to their wedding. They were the undisputed center of the cultural universe. They possessed a staggering, unprecedented level of global goodwill. The most powerful figures in the world, from Oprah Winfrey to David and Victoria Beckham, sat in the pews of St. George Chapel. They were not just a royal couple, they were a billion-dollar brand waiting to happen. They had the ultimate privilege, the wealth, the youth, and the absolute adoration of the public. They were presented as the modern future of an ancient institution. To look at their reality today, scrambling for positive headlines through paid placements, makes the current fall from grace hit with a devastating, almost uncomfortable weight. It is the profound contrast between a billionaire public relations illusion and a deeply broke reality. The cracks began to show when the brutal reality of their financial obligations met the vacuum of their actual output. Maintaining a fortress in Montecito and a security detail rivaling heads of state requires vast, renewable resources. But the massive Spotify deal collapsed in public humiliation. The Netflix partnership failed to produce anything of cultural significance beyond their own reality series, a well that has been milked entirely dry. Stripped of their proximity to the crown, their primary currency evaporated. The public and the industry slowly realized that the Sussexes were not selling a vision, they were simply selling their own grievances. And grievance has a very short shelf life. This realization triggered a profound shift in their strategy, leading to the first major ethical rupture. It happened in Uvalde, Texas, days after an unthinkable tragedy at an elementary school. Meghan arrived uninvited with a camera crew in tow. The visual of a former royal parading past the memorials of children to secure documentary footage sent a shockwave of disgust through the public. The outrage was so palpable, so intensely visceral, that even the executives at Netflix reportedly advised against using the footage in their final series. It was a staggering miscalculation. It exposed a chilling willingness to use the unimaginable suffering of others as a backdrop for self-elevation. And yet, instead of pulling back, this became a pattern. We saw the same strategy deployed during the Los Angeles wildfires. We saw it again as she communed with the grieving relatives of the Bondi Beach massacre. And now the tearful display in Switzerland. Critics began using a brutal, devastating phrase to describe this behavior, the tragedy vulture. She was consistently placing her designer outfits and carefully manicured empathy, precisely where the cameras could capture her against a backdrop of absolute grief. But the desperation became undeniable when viewers noticed the subtle, coordinated signals of their public relations machine. Hours before her speech in Switzerland, a carefully timed photograph of her daughter was released to social media, a blatant attempt to generate interest and elevate her own profile. When you search for the event online, major news outlets like Hello Magazine and Page 6 ran almost identical headlines about her powerful speech. This was not journalism. This was the result of a lazy, copy-and-paste press release handed down by the Sussex team. It was a manufactured win. They were treating the suffering of others not as a crisis to be solved, but as a marketing opportunity to change the public perception of their increasingly toxic brand. This toxic reputation is exactly what triggered the Great Hollywood Retreat. The A-list celebrities who once flocked to them suddenly vanished into the shadows. Oprah Winfrey quietly distanced herself. David and Victoria Beckham cut ties entirely. The elite circles of power operate on proximity to influence and good optics. They quickly realized that standing next to Harry and Meghan was No longer a status symbol, it was a reputational liability. The Sussexes had become synonymous with messy, low-rent drama, trying to sell lifestyle products while visiting sick children in a hospital, fundamentally disgusted the very people they desperately wanted to impress. The gates of Hollywood simply closed. In a state of sheer panic, their team retaliated with a classic Hollywood threat. Facing a wave of negative press, they bypassed traditional outlets and fed an exclusive story directly to Deadline. They announced a new Netflix project, a war movie about Afghanistan called No Way Out, but the announcement felt entirely hollow. It was a distraction, an illusion of momentum. The industry remembered that years ago, they had announced the acquisition of a best-selling novel called Meet Me at the Lake. Nothing ever happened. They announced a project called The Wedding Date. Nothing happened. The Deadline piece was not a genuine production update. It was a desperate signal to the industry. It was their way of saying they still had power. They still had a producer role and the industry needed them, but nobody was buying the illusion anymore. This staggering lack of self-awareness and accountability is not unique to Meghan and Harry. It is, in fact, the darkest psychological truth of the royal institution they left behind. When you are raised in an environment utterly devoid of consequence, your perception of reality becomes dangerously warped. This brings us to the ultimate devastating parallel of royal entitlement, an event so quietly cruel that it exposes the absolute moral rot at the center of this privilege. While the Sussexes were burning bridges in California, another royal was proving exactly why the public is exhausted by this family. During a traditional royal shooting weekend, Prince Andrew was mingling with guests. The royals have always had a deep historical obsession with blood sports, finding immense joy in blasting birds out of the sky. But on this particular weekend, it was not the hunt that caused a chilling rupture. Andrew had brought his gun dog, a loyal black Labrador. At one point, the dog simply did what dogs do. It leapt up and snatched a sausage roll from a low table. Any normal human being would scold the animal or simply pull it away. Instead, Prince Andrew turned and viciously kicked his own dog in the head. The sheer casual brutality of the act stunned the onlookers. When a brave guest stepped forward, horrified, and told the prince he could not treat an animal with such cruelty, Andrew turned his arrogant rage on the guest, essentially telling them to get lost. It was a terrifying glimpse into the mind of a man who demands absolute loyalty but offers only violence in return. The most disturbing part of this event was not just the kick itself, but the suffocating silence of the institution that protected him. Later that evening at dinner, Prince Philip quietly approached the guest who had intervened. The patriarch of the royal family whispered that the guest had done the right thing, and that more people should speak to Andrew that way. The palace knew exactly who Andrew was. They knew his darkness. They knew his terrifying lack of discipline, yet they enabled it. They covered it up. They allowed a man who abuses innocent creatures to operate with total impunity, ultimately leading to his disastrous, catastrophic associations later in life. Now we are looking at two sides of the exact same coin. On one side, a duchess in exile frantically using the grief of strangers to force her way back into a Hollywood elite that has firmly locked her out. On the other, a disgraced duke stripped of his titles, whose casual cruelty to an innocent animal reveals the exact reason the monarchy is facing a crisis of moral survival. The illusion has shattered. The money is drying up. The A-list has vanished. And as the Sussexes sit in their Montecito estate surrounded by empty production deals and broken relationships, they are about to realize that the most dangerous place to be is completely alone with no one left to blame. When the dust settles on a public collapse, the most deafening sound is the silence that follows. Inside the walls of their California compound, the reality of their isolation is likely setting in with a chilling finality. The Sussexes did not just burn bridges with the British monarchy, they incinerated their primary source of social currency. And in the brutal mathematics of Hollywood, when your cultural currency drops to zero, your phone simply stops ringing. The tragic irony of Harry and Meghan's current predicament is that they are now experiencing the very thing they accused the royal family of doing to them. They are being systematically frozen out, not by a centuries-old institution, but by the very American elite they fought so desperately to join. To understand the permanence of this rift, we have to look at the psychological warfare currently being waged across the Atlantic. The palace has deployed the ultimate devastating response to the Sussex PR machine. It is a psychological tactic known as grey rocking. They offer no response, no emotion, no retaliation, and absolutely no oxygen. When Meghan launches a new lifestyle brand, the palace releases nothing. When Harry gives another televised interview, hinting at a reconciliation that does not exist, the institution remains spectacularly unbothered. This absolute indifference is the most lethal weapon the monarchy possesses. It starves the Sussex narrative of the friction it requires to survive, because without the palace as a looming villain, Harry and Meghan are no longer freedom fighters escaping a toxic system. They are simply two very wealthy, very unemployed celebrities trying to sell luxury jam to a public that has moved on. This brings us to the subtle, almost humiliating shifts in their commercial strategy. The launch of American Riviera Orchard Meghan's lifestyle venture was supposed to be a triumphant return to form. Instead, it exposed a staggering lack of self-awareness. There is a profound, jarring dissonance in watching a woman who once commanded the global stage of the Commonwealth, now trying to generate hype by mailing jars of strawberry preserve to influencers. It is the ultimate visual of a shrinking empire. What was meant to look like an elegant pivot to domestic entrepreneurship actually signaled the complete exhaustion of their royal collateral. They have traded the historical weight of the Windsor dynasty for the fleeting transactional world of Instagram product placements. But the deeper psychological tragedy is what this commercial desperation reveals about their internal state. For years, the Sussexes have wrapped their public narrative in the language of healing and therapy. They speak constantly of trauma, of finding peace, of living in their truth. Yet their actions betray a relentless, exhausting compulsion to remain at the center of the cultural conversation no matter the cost. When you are truly at peace, you do not need to crash the grief of Uvalde families with a camera crew. When you are truly healed, you do not need to issue threatening press releases to entertainment trades just to prove you still matter. The constant need to weaponize empathy to frame every public appearance as a powerful stand against unseen enemies suggests a deep, unresolved void. It is the behavior of people who are not entirely sure who they are if the cameras ever stop rolling. This is exactly why the story of Harry and Meghan, much like the horrifying downfall of Prince Andrew, resonates so deeply with the public. It is no longer just a story about a family feud. It is a modern morality play about the illusion of power and the destructive nature of unchecked entitlement. We are watching what happens when people demand all the privileges of extreme influence but violently reject any of the responsibility. The royal family, for all its glaring historical flaws, operates on a system of duty. Even a man as deeply compromised and casually cruel as Prince Andrew was ultimately forced into the shadows to protect the institution. The Sussexes, however, believed they could dismantle the institution, monetize the wreckage, and still be universally beloved. They miscalculated the public's intelligence. What viewers ultimately realized was the profound difference between genuine humanitarianism and performative compassion. The public can spot the difference between someone doing the work and someone doing the PR, and once that illusion is shattered, once the audience sees the invisible strings of the marketing machine pulling at the edges of a tragedy, the trust is broken forever. The A-list celebrities saw it, the streaming executives saw it, and now the general public sees it. Going forward, the trajectory seems painfully clear. There will likely be more announcements of unproduced movies, more carefully staged paparazzi walks, and more desperate attempts to align themselves with relevant cultural moments. But the golden era is permanently behind them. They have become a cautionary tale of modern fame. They won their freedom, they secured their millions, and they crossed the ocean to build their own empire. But in the end, they are discovering the cold, unforgiving truth of the path they chose. You can walk away from the most powerful family in the world, but if your only remaining business model is selling the ghosts of your past, eventually you will run out of stories to tell. If you found this analysis insightful, please consider subscribing and leaving your thoughts below. We will continue to watch, analyze, and unpack the stories behind the illusion. Thank you for watching.